Let me read to you a passage from the 5th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 38 to 42. It's the Gospel for Monday after the 11th Sunday of Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." That's from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 42. Our Lord is speaking of his new law. What do I mean? Well, we read in the book of Exodus the words of God giving the 10 Commandments to Moses, chapter 20, verse 2 to 17. We read, "As the people stood afar off, Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. God then gave further explanations to Moses from chapter 20, verse 21 to chapter 31, verse 17, with various interruptions, on the worship of him as the only God and on the relations which were to prevail among the people. They are a detailed application of the 10 Commandments, especially to the worship of God, but also to the daily life of the people and individuals. They end with the statement that God gave to Moses, when he had made an end of speaking with them upon Mount Sinai, the 2 tables of the testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. Chapter 31, verse 18. In the book of Deuteronomy, there is the alternate account of the giving of the 10 Commandments, chapter 5, and there follow the numerous prescriptions which apply those commandments to the life and worship of the people. One of the directives of the Exodus account is that governing some injuries. "If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe." Exodus chapter 21, verse 23. Reference to this is in the Gospel I read earlier. Now, one of the notable things about St. Matthew's presentation of Christ in his pronouncing the Sermon on the Mount is that he is clearly another Moses. He ascends the mountain, chapter 5, verse 1, with the multitude behind him. His disciples come to him, perhaps reflecting the text of Exodus in which Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel, and he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. Chapter 24, verse 9 to 11. There, with his disciples with him and the people below, Christ utters his word on the mountain, his great sermon. It begins with the Beatitudes, which parallel the 10 Commandments given by God on Mount Sinai. Moses gave the law, Christ gives the new law. He makes it clear, though, that his law is the fulfillment of the old law. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Indeed, all must be accomplished." Chapter 5, verse 17 to 18. One of the laws of the law of Moses was that referred to above, an eye for an eye, and this too our Lord fulfills. But first let us notice the status that our Lord assumes. In both the book of Exodus, where this prescription is given, and in the book of Deuteronomy, where other various prescriptions are set out, Moses acts as the oracle and interpreter of God. Nowhere do we see Moses presuming the authority to state that you have been told on God's behalf to do such and such, or you have heard as coming from God that you are to do such and such, but I say to you that you are to do this. Now this is exactly what Jesus Christ unhesitatingly presumes to do. Not only does he, to the chagrin of his opponents, set aside the traditions of the elders while referring to the scriptures by means of which he refutes those opponents, but he goes an unprecedented step further. You have heard that it was said, he tells his audience from the mountain, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. Chapter 5, verse 38. I say to you, he is greater than Moses, who would not have assumed such authority, nor would any of the prophets, Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Jesus is God become man, who is once again speaking from a mountain, now taking his law to a new level. So the first thing we observe about our gospel passage I read earlier, from Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 to 42, is that it involves a theophany. Just as at Mount Sinai, the living God speaks and reveals his law, so the living God, now incarnate here on the mountain of the Beatitudes, is speaking and revealing his law. He is revealing it anew, so as to indicate how it is to be truly fulfilled. The key to the interpretation of the new law is the person who reveals it. This, incidentally, is very important. Otherwise, we shall sink into unhelpful forms of fundamentalism. When our Lord says in explanation, do not resist one who is evil, we must look to him. And following him, we must look to the teaching of the church. His church is his body and has received the gift of the divine Spirit to lead it to the complete truth. John chapter 16, verse 13. Our Lord himself resisted those who were evil. When he was powerfully struck on the cheek at his trial, he asked for an explanation. John chapter 18, verse 23. Our Lord's true meaning is shown as he hung upon the cross, pleading with his Father to forgive them, for they did not know what they were doing. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Despite all, he loved them and forgave them from the heart. We are to put away all hatred and all refusal to forgive from our hearts. Our gospel passage today that I read earlier is most revealing. The Son of God made man is giving a new revelation of the divine law, and it takes to a new fulfillment what had been previously revealed by the mouth of God's servant Moses. This time, God asks of us a heart that is like that of his divine Son, who speaks now from the mountain. He speaks not primarily to governments, but to the individual heart. It is to be a heart of love, devoid of revenge, striving with the aid of divine grace to be ever forgiving, ever loving of those who do evil. In this way, not the way of mere and exact retribution, that the disciple of Christ resists evil. This is the way that Jesus Christ, as he himself said, overcame the world. In the world you will have trouble, but be brave. I have overcome the world. John chapter 16, verse 33.